Our next question is in the hands of Mr. Shimmons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It has been said that we have too many politicians on this small island. Do you agree with that or not? And perhaps also, if you could tell us how you would encourage all sectors of the general public to engage with Tynwald and island politics in general.
Okay, first up on that particular one, I have Mrs. Humbles. All yours.
Two-tier question, thank you very much. Quite enjoying being on the other side of your questioning, actually. Too many politicians. I would say, actually, because the Isle of Man has to deal with very, very similar issues to what happens over in Westminster, I would say that, you have to kind of come at things from all angles on the Isle of Man, really, don't you? And in relation to sort of, every different department that we've got, we're absolutely necessary. You need politicians to fill those top posts. You need a legislative council. Certainly for present, I don't know what that's going to turn into, but for the present we need a legislative council to actually sit there and scrutinise. So no, I don't think that we have too many politicians living on the Isle of Man. Whether or not things might change in commissioners down the line, I don't know. There's been talk of that, particularly over the last few years. We shall see. But no, I don't think so. I think that we have the right amount of politicians thus far.
And on the engagement side?
On the engagement side, I do think that the Legislative Council certainly need to start potentially putting their views and some of the findings forward to the media and making themselves much more sort of available for comment, making them, because a lot of people don't actually understand, like Shirley said earlier, what the Legislative Council actually does. There was a poll that was actually done on Instagram not so long ago with a younger demographic, and there was 75% of that poll didn't have a clue what the Legislative Council actually was. It was quite frightening because, we have people, we take pride in the fact that people can start voting here from the age of 16. So maybe they should be a little bit more in the limelight.
Thank you. Mrs. Corlett.
Thank you. As far as do we have too many politicians, I think the answer has to be no. And the reason for that is that although we may be a small island, we still have to undertake the functions that a government has to undertake. And therefore, regardless of the size of the population, there has to be a certain number of politicians to undertake the roles and actually form good government. I think the numbers that we have currently from an MHK perspective for each constituency is about right, because I know that as a small island you get a lot of attention from your constituents, and that takes up a lot of your time. So I think that as far as there being a question of being too many, I think that's an argument that the public will always make in sort of cost-cutting measures. They will always put that forward. But I think it's probably about right. How to engage with the public more is always going to be a difficult issue. I think what has been done to date, particularly with regard to interaction with children and the sort of junior Tynwald that's held and getting school children interested at a younger age, that is something that can be progressed and I think built upon. But there will always be an element of the public who are not interested in engaging with politics, and it's going to be very difficult to force them to do so. However, I think it is in our interest to be more transparent and to be open and available for discussion whenever possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Joughin.
I agree with Mrs. Corlett basically that we might have quite a number of politicians per head of population, but we do need a definite number of politicians and people in government to basically run the country. So I don't think we could decrease the numbers particularly. How do we get people to engage? I think it has to start at school level, probably junior school level, engaging children at that point, and I think it needs to be a continuous thing. I understand it's very difficult because obviously there's certain things on the national curriculum that they have to be studying, for the exams that they're going to take. So it's difficult to see exactly how that could fit in. But I think something needs to be done about that, because there are people in their 20s and 30s, they don't even know what Legislative Council is. They haven't got a clue. They think it's something to do with Douglas Council. So there's a lot of confusion on that. I certainly remember actually going back to Onken School, having lessons about Sheedings and Tynwald and how politics works. And I don't know if it's changed in school, I just don't know. But there seems to be a definite ignorance, and I think it really has to start with education. It has to start at a young age, and we have to engage people. Possibly something along the lines of a question time, 4 times a year on the island. That might actually get a fresh audience in. There's certainly a lot of groups on social media, political groups, but it tends to be the same people with the same ideas. And I think if you could engage a larger audience and get people in to participate, they'd have the process of thinking through what question they actually wanted to put. You could have 6 MHKs at a time, 4 times a year. If you want to involve MLCs, you could up the number. But that might be a way of making the population engage.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Quick off at that point, thank you. Mr. Furner.
Okay, on the number of MHKs, of course, we all know that the size of the island, its population, is equivalent to 1 constituency in the UK. So someone with a viewpoint from the UK should say there should only be 1 MHK. Now, obviously, that's absurd because there are so many functions that the MHKs have to carry out. I don't think anybody is arguing that the number of MHKs should increase. I think there is a case for arguing that the number of MHKs should decrease, just as there is a case for arguing that the size of the public sector should decrease, and that simplifications in local authorities should be made to cut costs there as well. So I would be in favour of a decrease in the number of MHKs and a decrease in the number of MLCs. How to engage the public? I agree that education is probably the most effective way to get people in at an early stage. I don't know to what extent MHKs and MLCs actually visit schools and put forward their views to schools and teach the children what it's all about. As I say, I don't know what it is, but maybe that can be increased or made more effective. I think the government website can also be improved.
Thank you. Thank you. Mrs. Lord-Brennan.
I don't think that the number of MHKs should be decreased. I'm not coming into this with any like fixed ideas of any grand changes that need to be made. But what I would say is both these things come down to representation, don't they? Is that, you know, really we live here where your constituency is, you get the chance to vote in people that, you know, that hopefully should be representing you. And if we can make Keys, Tynwald and the Legislative Council represent Manx society a little bit more, then maybe it will resonate more. And it really has to be a two-way thing, doesn't it? I mean, there's surveys going out all the time, members are active on social media, there's consultations happening all the time. So we have to get to the point where it's thinking, well, look, there's lots of outward communication that goes on, and that is great. We have such an accessible parliament. People can participate in different ways, and so to me the final piece of the puzzle that's left then is making the parliament, making Keys, making Legco look a little bit more like it's representative of just normal, you know, normal people on the Isle of Man. I don't, you know what I mean. You know, I'm a mum. You say, when was the last time I went to school? Well, this morning, you know, like my little boy listens to Manx radio. He's interested because we listen to it and we talk about stuff. And my house isn't going to be the only house that's going on in. So I think it's definitely possible to bring more of this out.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly.
Thanks, yeah. There's a concept in kind of startup businesses about minimum viable product, and I think that's kind of maybe what's behind your question. It's nothing to do with the kind of size of the island or of the population. It's about what's the minimum size required to make government work, for Tynwald to work? I don't know what the answer is. I'd agree it's probably not more than we have. So there might be scope for some reduction, but it's difficult to answer without having been involved. But that's the key core. What is the minimum number of people we need to make it work effectively? As regards engagement, I mean, I think it's a real problem. Voter turnout is very low. Response to consultations is poor. And I think there's a reason for that. I think a lot of people feel that their voice doesn't count, that their voice doesn't make any difference, and therefore it's rational for them not to engage if they think there's going to be no output from their engagement. So I don't think just purely kind of having a nicer website or using Twitter more often is actually going to get to the core of the problem. I think we need to make people feel that their decisions and their voice does count. And I think the way to do that actually is by involving them in decision making at a much earlier stage. You see that in a number of cities around the world at a local government level, voting, for example, on infrastructure spend, on this, that, and the other. So there's scope, I think, to expand that so that people feel that their voice really, really counts in decision making.